up, which is a classic anti-control type deck.
Yeah, I mean, we could already see how much Jarla respects this paladin. I was lucky enough to be part of Jarla's practice group for this tournament, and you know, some of the best players in the world. We're talking about Hunter Ace, Orange, Jarla, Just Saying, me, and all of us were saying that Paladin is the deck to bring here. It seems so powerful, and it is in no small part due to Jarla's build. He's taken out the Red Scale Dragon Tamer, taken out the Amber Watcher, and instead has a much more aggressive package with the Argent Braggots in there, which I must say were looking very, very strong overall. And I think he's got himself a premium matchup to get things rolling up against Glory's Warrior.
That's right. Lining up already with the Libram Paladin into Control Warrior. Historically, Libram Paladin, by virtue of, when it runs into Control matchup, it has time to tack on all the Librams of Wisdoms at once, milk the value out of Lady Liadrin and the Penflingers. I think that it would, in almost all circumstances, be favored towards the Libram Paladin. The Silas in Glory's list, though, I wonder if that's ever worth thinking about. There would be a situation where you would break up your Ashtongue combo to instead maybe steal something significant on Jarla's side. I do think Glory's priority will still be going for the OTK win condition, but depending on how much pressure Jarla's able to put down in the mid game, maybe Glory can't stack up that much armor.
That's going to be a big concern for Glory, I've got to say, as Jarla gets himself a premium first day at school, drawing a card with beautiful positioning. Fantastic play on those 2 minions he discovered. But one thing I want to talk about, as Glory has, pretty simple first few turns, so not really too many decisions, is that already we can see from Glory's body language, hands covering his mouth. This has been something that we've consistently seen over in the Asia-Pacific region, is that Glory, for the most part, plays very, very strong Hearthstone. But when he gets into that situation, when he starts doubting himself, he's in those losing situations, things start to crumble fairly rapidly. And I hope that he can keep his head in the game all the way throughout to the finals in this tournament.
It's true. We've watched Glory since the very first season of APAC, and he really came into his own this year, but it's not been without a few hurdles. I think he has definitely proven that he has what it takes to be there up at the top, beating Surrender several times, having that dominant performance in Season 1, and still a performance that you can't knock in Season 2, even though he did fall short of Bank Yugi at the very end there. However, it's going to be tough because Jarla already has his first Aldor Attendant available, prioritizing card draw, though, and using that, saving that blessing of, Libram of Wisdom for a bit later.
Yeah, this is one of the really powerful effects of this Blessing of Wisdom, is that against Warriors specifically, in all these Control Warrior archetypes, be it the ETC version, the Silas plus Ashtongue version that Glory's gone for here, you don't want to be killing off every single minion at the start of the game. You want to let it swell and then deal with it all at once with a big Risky Skipper or Brawl later on down the line. And Jarla is preying on that beautifully. He knows that this is very likely to get another card draw. It's only really, I think, the Anchor that you're looking at that could be used to take it out early. He knows that's a one-off, and so I love that he's getting himself 2 cards drawn for 1 mana.
Right. And I think you can already tell, based on Jarla prioritizing the card draw, that he doesn't see this as a matchup that he can take fatigue, even though it is a slow deck on the other side. He is on the clock to try and beat down Glory, or just make sure that he can't accumulate the armor to eventually succumb to that big Ashtongue combo with the Silas. He has Lady Liadrin already in hand, but I think he's still missing, I was going to say Aldor Truthseeker to really smooth out this whole combo. It is available next turn coined out, though.
Honestly, this is just looking like a premium start for Jarla. He, of all people, is going to know the value of holding on to Penflinger. You want to make sure that you keep that in your hand for the entire game, if possible, and not let your opponent deal with it. Because this is kind of the thing that was the... I feel like the real stroke of genius that really made this deck happen in the first place. I'm not sure if it was Ball Control who coined like the original build of the deck, but basically just the synergy between Libram of Wisdom and Penflinger that just allows you to run a very card draw heavy, low curve deck for the most part. And in the end game, you're just doing 5 or 6 damage to the opponent's face every single turn, and there's nothing that they can do to stop that. So I love that he's getting in those Penflings in at the start, but not leaving it vulnerable to be removed.
And on top of Bor's original innovation, this list from Jarla, which the other Libram Paladins are not necessarily running, is the Silas Darkmoon, which could potentially be a check for the Rattlegore on the other side. Silas, with the Paladin hero power, has that additional utility of being able to guaranteed give a cheaper minion on the other side if you're able to fit in the hero power. But speaking of new inclusions, Glory is playing that Sword Eater, probably one of the, if not the best card of the expansion, just already coming down here to try and stave off some of that card draw.
He's going to do a good job of that. Jarla has a couple of different ways to go about this. Obviously, he can do the trick, I suppose, of attacking in with the Libram of Wisdomed minion and then playing the Aldor Truthseeker to immediately give another buff for 0 mana. But that doesn't actually deal with the Sword Eater. And he's got to be careful about how he uses the coin here, because his hand does start to slow down if he goes coin Truthseeker here, for example.
It's true. It's also important to note that the Argent Braggart is probably dependent on the Truthseeker staying healthy for it to actually get enough value for the next turn. I like the idea of just trying to milk one extra Libram of Wisdom, at least here, put it in the Liadrin pool. He can take the bump here and maybe not commit to the full remove here. It is looking like he is going to commit to the full remove though and hold off on that Truthseeker. I think this solves both of the issues we were concerned in one go, which is saving the coin to make his curve a bit smoother and getting rid of the minion on the other side.
Yep, keeps those Libram of Wisdoms being played over and over again as well, because as I was talking about with the Penflingers, one crucial part of that late game combo to get it rolling is, of course, Lady Liadrin. You get back every single Libram of Wisdom that you've played, even if it's kind of still in your head counted as the original one. So every time he plays it, that's another card that he'll be adding into his hand in the later stages of the game. And I think overall from Jarla, it's perfectly fine to just take it slow. He knows that this deck is going to apply very, very little pressure. And once it does come down to the Rattlegore that I imagine Glory will be relying on to deal a lot of his damage, Jarla has the perfect answer in the owner of Darkmoon Faire, Silas Dark.
Yes, indeed. For Glory, though, this is probably the premium lackey option in the Draconic one, because he doesn't have very much card generation in the rest of the deck, and he has pressure options here that he can try and postpone the Rattlegore turn with, or at least maybe even follow it up. Because I was, actually honestly eyeing the Onyxia, but without coin, it does make the curve a little bit more difficult. So I think it makes a lot more sense to go for the 6-drop for his next turn play.
Can't burn a card from his opponent by attacking in, so I think it's reasonable enough to hold on to the weapon here. The 2-1 isn't going to be getting too much value. Even if a Hand of Adal comes down, it still trades into the Kargath fairly evenly.
So there's room once again for Jarla to fit in some flings here. It looks pretty clean if he takes a trade and pen flings, but then what will he put the buff on? You could take a substandard Argent Braggart here, just to make sure you have a target for the Libram of Wisdom that isn't Penflinger.
I mean, I'm looking at Truthseeker Coin Penflinger. He can still do that and then finish with the Libram of Wisdom so that he gets the Penflinger back to the hand. Or maybe he'll just ignore the Kargath as well. I think you probably do want to get rid of it here, because the coin, as it stands, isn't especially important anymore. The 7 into 7 isn't a curve that he's going to play out on their mana cost. He's going to want to be saving those for later on.
I think that this line does just give him the best tempo on board, and even though he does give up the coin, you're right, he doesn't necessarily want to be curving into Liadrin straight away anyway. It's very possible that the next turn would just be some type of Penflinger milking turn once again.
We're already starting to see, though, that unless we're getting minions removed every single turn by Glory, those Argent Braggarts start to become a pretty big threat. A 2-mana 5/7 pretty much forces some kind of a removal from Glory, who at this point, I think quite wisely, is starting to just think, what is his overall game plan here? How is he actually moving towards a victory in this very unfavorable situation?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because by virtue of a minion sticking, not only is he falling behind on tempo, he's not able to stack up the armor that he needs for his long-term win condition of the Soulbound Ashtongue later on. Doesn't have the Risky Skipper combo in hand. Pretty welcome sight to see the Cutting class as his bit of cycle that he really needs to get going, but I do expect it's just going to be the Dragon Maw Skystalker on curve here, and it's a sticky minion, pretty annoying for Jarla to have to deal with and try and leverage that board presence to go for a cleaner card draw turn next turn.
And now the the balancing act has to begin for Jarla. Again, when you're playing pretty much any deck up against Control Warrior, it's about finding that sweet spot where you're putting on enough pressure to actually close out the game, but also not overextending into removal. What on this turn do you think is like the appropriate breakpoint of stuff to put on the board?
I quite like the idea of cashing in on the Braggart potentially here. It is a little bit scary to Bladestorm, but maybe he can try and leverage the fact that the Dragon Moss Skystalker has Death Rattle, and so it's tough for Glory to actually give himself a Bladestormable board on the other side, if that sticks. Jarla was looking at the Libram of Justice here, which definitely also looks like a really strong option to be able to tank that first half of the Stalker immediately.
Okay, I mean, if you're playing the Devout Pupil, Hand of Vidal kind of is like a 1-mana card on this turn because of the reduction that you get there.
Pupil lets him fit in the hero power, but Braggart, it's kind of tough to pass this up, right? It's not looking like it's going to get any stronger here. He's going to cash in the Broom as well and make his board a little bit more resilient to single target removal plus Bladestorm.
Okay. I think this is definitely not an overextension. I think finding a use for that Libram of Wisdom, or sorry, Libram of Justice at that point was something I was kind of looking at quite heavily because there's not going to be too many good targets up against Warrior, given that the only big minion that they're really playing, you are just going to Silas Darkmoon and steal their Rattlegore instantly as soon as that is possible.
The Rattlegore is earmarked for Silas, but perhaps the Kargath Prime is the other minion that you could save the Libram of Justice for. It might still be quite a ways off, though, but it's worth noting that Glory is running a single copy of Stage Dive in his deck to try and draw to that Prime a bit more consistently. Oh man, does this already have to be a Barov? He doesn't have good removal other than that.
I mean, you just
on
know
top
that...
of
This isn't even
not a great proc for the Barov either.
Exactly. It's not even a glimpse of what you're going to be facing down later on. Like, even if he goes for Barov here and clears off the board, you're expecting Libram of Hope to come down onto the board, or Devout Pupils, or another Truth Seeker. There's so much meat in this Paladin deck. But at the same time, I'm not really offering a solution, because if you just tank the damage turn after turn, you're going to die.
And that's why he is pulling the trigger on the Risky Skipper Barrow combo. This is so expensive, not just because it's one of his premium board clears, but the Risky Skipper is one of his best ways of gaining armor for that long-term combo win condition. There's, of course, still another copy in the deck to pair with the Armor Smiths, but I think Jarla should be pretty happy to see that first big combo expended already. Draws into the second Libram of Wisdom as well, so he can start flinging with almost reckless abandon. He can't just fling this Barov, though, because it would kill off the flinger.
Yeah, it's a little bit more annoying than it initially appears. I mean, I think the main thing to bear in mind here is that with Penflinger and Lady Liadrin in hand, Jarla can be fairly liberal with his resources. He can clear out room in his hand, get all those Librams back to his hand, and then start, Penflinging every single turn. Which is why Libram of Justice here to deal with this Barov, as Jarla, as always, reaches the conclusion a bit quicker than I was coming to. I think it's pretty good here. There's not many good targets for it. He has the Barov for if there's a big minion that comes down later on.
Right.
And he just clears a card out of his hand to set up for that late game of Penflingers every turn.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't look like the most intuitive use for the Libram of Justice, but looking at Jarla's overall game plan, it makes a ton of sense because that Barov was really the only thing standing between him and unlimited free damage. Well, not free, he has to spend mana on it, but basically free damage in the near future. He has Liadrin to just restock on all of these Librams, and Glory in a clock here, having used that first Skipper, means that the Battle Rage is tough to make use of. Thankfully, though, he has Cutting Class to help him cycle a bit further to get to that Kargath Prime.
Yeah, this is one of the big reasons why players have been including Ironbeak Owl in their warriors, as I think we'll be seeing from a couple of the other players this weekend, is that when the threat isn't there, you can just play out your Librams of Wisdom. You don't have to think about it at all. They're never going to be stolen, they're never going to be silenced, and you will get them back into your hand, which just makes it so difficult for Glory to come up with any real way of dealing with this inevitable late game bunch of threats.
Bladestorm is a great draw, though. He is able to put 3 damage on the Devout Pupil, so he can clean it up with his weapon, and of course the Recruit gets swept up in the first part of the Bladestorm, and then he can finish with the Evil Quartermaster and finally end the turn ahead on board.
getting to that weird state as well. Like, I still think that Jarla is in a very strong position, but in terms of Glory's overall game plan, what I'm looking at here is eventually you want to be playing out the Rattlegore, quite obviously. You then expect it to be stolen with Silas, but maybe at that point, Glory can hold on to his, wait until he gets his own Silas to steal it back again and hope that that will be enough to start pressuring out his opponent. Outside of that, I'm just not seeing how he gets there before Jarla machine guns him down with these pen flingers.
Yes, the rotating carousel of Rattlegores, that is definitely telling of what the meta currently looks like. I definitely think it's worth considering for Glory just to play to the curve next turn. He could also just be thinking, if you have the Silas, I'm going to hold the L. I'm just going to try and hope that you don't have it and take a win from there. But it's definitely dependent on what Jarla does this turn, which I definitely think looks like just a couple more flings by utilizing these Librams of Wisdom.
Yeah, it's like it's getting a little bit tough to actually clear out cards from his hand, because obviously Librams come back every turn. Penfling is just going to keep bouncing back into his hand. But it's still pretty clean. You're not complaining about what's going on here from Jarla's perspective, because eventually that Lady Liadrin will be playable. He can draw an extra card with the Hand of Adal, and for his sake, maybe he can even find the Libram of Hope beforehand for yet another big, meaty Divine Shield on board.
Look at Glory's reaction when he sees the second Libram of Wisdom committed. He knows what's going on with this deck. He is playing it himself. But that is a huge draw. Kargath Prime could be the answer to Glory's prayers. However, he is hovering the Rattlegore because, like I was saying a while ago, he might just be thinking, if you have it, then that's the game. But if this sticks, then I have Bloodsworn Mercenary next turn.
Yeah, I think before he got the Kargath, he was just going to be on plan A of just pray that there is no Silas in hand. He would have received a 4/4 in exchange, I think. Or, I mean, even then he could just hero power, couldn't he? It wouldn't have even been that bad at all for Jarla. But now with Kargath in hand, he can at least delay and maybe try and find, again, his own Silas to steal back. Is his best bet I'm currently seeing.
I mean, honestly, if he didn't have the Rattlegore and Kargath in hand, I would be looking at this Dimensional Ripper and trying to go for a prayer, but I think it makes more sense just to go for a piece of efficient single target removal, which Glory has been sorely lacking this entire game. Kargath putting together a hefty chunk of armor, still very far off from being able to do an Ashtung combo, let alone he doesn't even have the Ashtung in hand, but it's a start, which Glory absolutely needed. Right now he's just praying that there's no Liadrin to follow up for Jarla. But the bad news is it's there, and there's also Libram of Hope to chuck in the pool as well.
I mean, what do you even do here? Like, Barov is obviously about as good as it's ever going to get, to be honest, because, again, there aren't really those big minions that you're afraid of seeing from your opponent, so I don't mind using that. Again, getting another card out of your hand, and maybe even just ending with a Libram of Hope as well. Just get it all out. You're going to get it all back with Lady Liadrin, so there's no real point in holding on to it.
Yeah, I think it's really strong. If Jarla had one more cheap spell, I would hear the argument for trying to clear the Kargath with just Penflinger and holding on to Barov, but you make a great point that since Jarla has the Silas already in hand earmarked for the Rattlegore, the Barov just doesn't have that many good targets, so he might as well go for the clear this way. He gets amazing tempo for his trouble, and he's all loaded up for Liadrin on the next turn. Glory has his work cut out for him.
So with this hand, with a lot of the kind of pieces to draw cards, if he gets a risky skipper, maybe we could be looking at the kind of hand that just tries to draw a bunch of cards. Again, the original game plan, I suppose you could say, of going for Silas Darkmoon, Ashtung Slayer, and dealing all that damage, it's still technically alive. Like, if he can deal with this board with, I don't know, some kind of a brawl into Bladestorm, he's not taking that much damage quite yet, so if he does get that massive Whirlwind Armor Smith risky skipper combo, the original OTK is still potentially alive.
Right. Brawl Bladestorm is expensive, but Glory could be saying, okay, you have 3 cards in hand, one of them is Penflinger. If you don't have Liadrin, I could very well just have the Breathing Room for next turn. Shield Slam is a pretty big pickup. Worth noting that one of them, if he still wants the Ashtung combo, has to be held on for the near future, but this is the first one that he's drawn.
Well, with the amount of damage he's dealing, he could be leaning towards a Heroic Strike, I believe, with the Death Rattle from the Barov there, which is expensive in terms of the damage you're taking. If we're looking at that game plan of stacking up armor, this does hurt. But he needs that removal for all these threats that are coming down.
That is very true. It's a tough pill to swallow, but I think it's definitely well considered from Glory. He does need Risky Skipper in the near future. Hasn't hit Ankar in the early game, which has really hurt his cycle potential, which is really important for Warrior. Jarla flinging for days here.
Like, I'm just wondering if this is the Lady Liadrin turn, because your hand realistically is never going to get clearer than this. If you're never playing Silas, you're never letting the Penflinger die, the Librams will come back every turn. This is kind of as good as you can expect, I think, for quite a while.
That's fair. So we could just see Hero Power, double Wisdom, and then Liadrin.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you're obviously worrying about overdraw a lot. Like, he will overdraw the top card of his deck almost every time on the following turn with this line of play, because the Librams will always come back. But I think that's still fine. You accept one overdraw. It's not a key combo piece, I think it's fair to say. And he should still be able to be in, again, that very strong late game position.
He also hits the Libram of Justice in there. Sorry, Hope at the very end. So even if this board gets cleared up, he has another 8/8 waiting in the wings. He also has that other prong of attack with just the Penflingers getting additional value turn after turn, and Glory is cracking under the incremental pressure every single turn. Battle Rage still not getting any work done.
Glory has such a hard read on Silas in hand, because there's a card that's been at the entire game, it hasn't been played, even when Jarla has specifically been trying to dump cards from his hand. So he has two options now. It's play the Rattlegore and pray that it doesn't get stolen, even though he very much suspects it will. Or I guess build up to that OTK still, which seems less and less likely as time goes on.
The problem is his only building option is Battle Rage right now for the single draw, and I can't think of an individual draw that gets him out of the situation and allows him the time to put together the OTK. So I think Glory's first instinct of just trying to pray that the Rattlegore sticks is where I would conclude as well. But once the Silas comes down, it is absolutely nail in the coffin.
The problem is, whether or not Glory gets the Silas Darkmoon to steal back after Jarla steals here, he's kind of just dying. The Rattlegore isn't even his biggest concern right now. It's just the pressure that's coming through.
Pretty wild. Well, Jarla can Hero Power and rotate counterclockwise after the Silas goes on the left of the board. And fit in a couple flings as well. A single fling. Oh, Glory feels it. He knows. He knows. Can you blame him, though?
Fully well what's going on. And I agree. I still think, he knows, the unsaid thing is he's not winning this game. As it carries on going, he's getting less and less likely to get there. So I think this is still the correct play, even if it works essentially never. As Jarla picked the correct option there. Almost looked like he picked this way, and I was about to lose my mind. But good job.
I'm still upset that it's called this way and that way instead of clockwise, counterclockwise. I'm not a visual-based learner. I like words. Yeah, this is just brutal. I don't see a way Glory can get out of this. Even if he wins, quote-unquote, the brawl, at the very least, there is an 8/8 Rattlegore waiting for him on the other side.
This is actually also very, very clever from Jarla, because up until that point on the previous turn, he was obviously afraid of Silas stealing one of his minions with all the Librams put on it. At this point, he knows if Silas comes down, it's going to steal the Rattlegore back, so it is perfectly safe to just load up on all these Librams, deal the maximum damage, and just force Glory to find an answer, which with a single card Battle Rage into a completely useless card is just not happening. He's still so far behind here.
Yeah, great spot. It's great timing from Jarla to make sure that on the turn when Silas is the biggest threat, he has two threats to be able to make sure he can push lethal the next turn. The Bulwark of Azzinoth looking pretty pathetic for Glory because he knows Penflinger is in hand to be able to just deal all of that incremental small damage before the big boys can hit for lethal damage. I think it is lights out for Glory, and we could very well be going to Game 2 real soon.
Definitely looking that way. Glory, to be fair, he did not find the deck he was looking for in this first matchup. This build of the Warrior, I think it's very fair to say, was more intended for the aggro, which is what the wider field is looking like. Honestly, I think Glory would be happier in a Group B, where you have the likes of SYF, Silvername with those more aggressive lineups that I think this would be a bit stronger against. He met a tough opponent in Jarla up first, but even having said that, the rest of the matches I don't think can be anywhere near as dire as this.
And I do believe this is just lethal straight away because he gets 3 flings. He has the weapon attack to go for lethal, and then with the Hand of Adal buffs, that is just going to be enough to close out the game.
Yep, looking that way.
And now that we have that first deck out of the way for Jarla, I want to talk about the story of his lineup as a whole, because we had featured this Libram Paladin in Soddle Spot. You were talking about how this is the deck that his practice group landed on as the premier bring for the tournament. But what do you think about the inclusion of Priest as well, which Jarla is the only one bringing control?
Yeah, Priest is a bit of a weird one. It's that deck that still is in a lot of fluctuation at the moment. We're seeing builds that go all in on the buff package, where they're running Grave Rune, Psych Split, this full kind of Miracle Priest kind of, if you will, whereas other players leaning more towards the control package that has been becoming more and more popular. But I think the main thing to bear in mind is just that with the change to Nazmani Bloodweaver, where it will only reduce the cost of cards that cost more than 0, so you're always getting a reduction, Priest has a very high power ceiling at the moment. Whether or not it will be able to reach that every game is obviously besides another point. But if you hit that combo of Sethic Veilweaver and Nazmani Bloodweaver, get that miracle rolling, I think you're in a very, very strong position against any kind of archetype. And Jarla, as we've been talking about time and again, is one of those very strong technical players who knows all of his decks inside and out, is exactly the kind of player who will be able to maneuver and engineer those situations where he will get those incredibly powerful priest plays.
And while we do talk about the story of Jarla's lineup, I think the story for Glory's lineup is he's going to have a hard time getting this warrior through, because even though it does have that OTK win condition, which on paper I would put as favored against Priest, the fact that Jarla is running Mindrender Elucia can absolutely pick apart that win condition from Glory. Jarla himself, with his lineup, was worried about running 2 Elucias on the other side and would have banned Priest with Elucia if he had seen it, but there's no one else in the field rocking that. So I think that Jarla, at least before he runs into the aggro, should be pretty happy with how things have panned out.
Yeah, it's a pretty robust list, I think, at this point as well. One of the things that players were experimenting with was removing Cabal, Acolyte, and Wave of Apathy, and then they quickly came to their senses, I think we can say, and put it back in as a truly disgusting combo. I do think that this current build of Priest is a little bit vulnerable to Soul Demon Hunter now, as we see from Glory in our next matchup, just because Demon Hunter, with the addition of Bladed Lady, has actually upped the amount of big threats that they're pushing down onto the board, whereas the Priest that Jarla has got has cut Shadow Word Death, so its actual ability to answer these minions has become a little bit more vulnerable. And as we all know, if Soul Demon Hunter sticks a single big minion on the board, you can kind of just pack up shop right away, no matter what you're playing.
That's right. I think that while this matchup has its echoes in the previous iteration, in the last meta, I think now that the Priest has the Nazmani in the list, I think it has a bit more ability to go for tempo in the early game and make it so that it's really tough for the Demon Hunter to be able to make sure that the Priest doesn't have an Apotheosis target. So Bladed Lady is also a key card here, but not this early on. I do think that the OTK Demon Hunter, the Soul Demon Hunter is slightly favored in the matchup, but I think Jarla is among the best Priest players in the world, so I'd love to see how he approaches this.
One thing that I like the look of very much is that Sethic Veilweaver in the starting hand, even with the Raised Dead as well, actually, just because you can then play it out on turn 2 to try and contest those early minions, and also just res it right back to hand. The Apotheosis, while it's a very powerful card in the matchup, I often find is a little bit too slow. You're not necessarily having a target on board in the early turns to go with it, but it looks like Jarla is saying he wants to go for a full redo there. I think that was, with none of these cards being kept, which I find it a little surprising. Sethic is something I'm always looking for.
I'm in favor of pitching it all. I think the Sethic played out on turn 2 is unlikely to stick, but even though, like you said, you can raise dead it right away, it doesn't mean that Jarla has necessarily another card in the pool that you would want to raise dead that soon. I'm in favor of looking for things like what he got, the Draconic Studies, to really cheapen out his big threats for later. Or, of course, Nazmani Bloodweaver, which is the soul of this deck, I believe, now in the Dark Moon Fair meta. Didn't get to see the Discover options, unfortunately, but he did just end up on the Amalgam Yeti.
Yeah, a very strong option no matter what. And against Demon Hunter, you have to bear in mind that no matter what the list, Taunt can be very effective, especially up against Glory's list, which has cut Kane's Sun Fury very interestingly to make room for Relentless Pursuit and Bladed Lady. So even though this is likely to be played out fairly early on, every taunt that Jarla can generate does have to be pushed through, either by removal spells or just attacks.
It's interesting how the removal of Kane informs the matchup now in this Dark Moon Fair meta, because the Kane was a card that you would only want to play when you're pushing the lethal against Priest, because when you ignore taunts, you're saying that I don't care about Apotheosis because the game is ending. By going for this more measured approach with the Relentless Pursuit and Bladed Lady, I think Glory can have a bit more of a consistent game plan at the expense of maybe some extra burst damage lost.
Well, in terms of his starting hand, it's pretty far from ideal, I will say. He doesn't have the early minions, which he has cut some of. He's only got one Wand Maker in the list, so he wasn't super likely to curve out at the start. But the game plan, in my opinion, is quite clearly to get that skull online as soon as possible. Aldraki, that's going to be coming down as soon as possible to just be getting some damage through. And the Consume Magic, as soon as he finds any kind of a decent target, he's just going to slam that down.
Yeah, even if it's not a decent target, any opposing minion, I think, would just take on the cycle as soon as possible, because it's all about getting that skull to the left side. Whether it was last meta or this meta, the skull making it so that Demon Hunter can do ridiculous breakpoints of damage all in one turn, even without maximum mana, is the kicker for Priest, that they can't necessarily build a board that's resistant to a big blade dance.
Such a weird turn here from Jarla, because Amalgam feels bad because then you can't play the Spellkin. But Palm Reading feels bad because you want to play that after the Spellkin to reduce the cost of the cards you've got. Nothing quite working out here. I think he's probably going to end up on Palm Reading here and then just follow up with the Spellkin on the next turn. But it really doesn't feel great.
He can go Spellkin plus a 1-cost spell if there is something good enough for the next turn. So if the concern is just spending all your mana, then I'm on board for it. His next draw, of course, could just change everything.
Well, that's a reasonable way to follow up here for Glory. I think very reasonable to expect you'll have time to play the Aldraki in the next couple of turns, so no reason to have to tempo it out to get that skull to the left-hand side. And, I mean, with the way his curve is setting out now, maybe I'm overly focusing on the skull. This could just be Weapon into Soul Shard Lapidary, into Relentless Pursuit, and just kill them.
That is definitely a thing. Jarla does not currently have Apotheosis. He can do the turn I was saying of Circus Amalgam plus the insight that he got for maximum stats on board, but maybe he is just going to prioritize the more expensive minion here and try and push for a bigger swing later on. The Murazond in hand is always something key to be aware of because Glory does have Aldraki Warblades.
Bladed Lady is going to be playable in the next few turns if Glory wants to maneuver it that way, of course, but he's going off curve here to get that big minion on board. As I was saying, Priest has lowered the amount of removal in the deck, so these minions are more likely to stick. So it's more important to get them down, to get as many attacks through as possible. I love this deviation.
I also really like the line. He's also set up a board state where he's managed to stick these other small minions, so it's not necessarily completely vulnerable to the Cabal Acolyte Wave of Apathy combo. Which Jarla doesn't even have at the moment. He has Wave of Apathy to stall and then go for the 6-cost Soul Mirror next turn, but not all of the minions even fall prey to Soul Mirror.
Jarla digging.
Is corrupted at the moment, so if he hits a discounted Nazmani with this Sethek and a bunch of cheap spells in hand, he could be talking. Problem is, if you go for Insight, you're not able to go for the Amalgam plus Wave of Apathy game plan, which is the safest way to stay on board for the next turn, which is maybe Soul Mirror.
And really smooth this out. He finds the Nazmani, which means he could either go next turn for a massive pop-off, or he could try and do it now. But honestly, I just don't think he has time.
Yeah, there's no time. He's going on the road. Okay, it looks like he is going to go for Lord Redwood and then It's a line that I
Okay.
honestly didn't think. Um, Bloodweaver, it's a epic turn immediately, but it's a pretty neat spot for Jarla because maybe the 2/5 Nazmani survives and he gets to have his cake and eat it.
It's okay. It's like it was a good way to end the turn there. It does just mean the board dies to weapon hero power with all the minions trading in. Everything is then gone, which is, I mean, devastating to be honest. That is really not what you want to see. And the rest of his hand, it starts to look a lot weaker after these Nazmanis have been cleared off. Murazon for 6 could be very powerful. Maybe you can snipe a skull, draw 3 extra cards. But I wonder if given more time, that would have been the line that Jarla ended up on.
Maybe. Speaking of time, I don't even know if Murazon into Skull is going to be enough here. I like that Glory goes for Consume
Mm.
Magic over the hero power with what I do believe is just going to be a Marrow Slicer here. And get it out of the side of his hand well in the near future, and he still gets the full board here.
Better than going for the Aldraki. Like, you can set up Skull for the next turn with very few fragments in the deck anyway. I couldn't be overly focused on that. Next turn couldn't be Bladed Lady, which ends up very
Yeah,
powerful.
I do think Glory might be deviating for that, and he could maybe just hold off on Aldraki altogether if he's scared of Murazond. But Jarla now has access to a very full mirror. Oh, we still don't see the discovers, unfortunately.
It's a pretty
Okay,
good one,
what's up
though.
with Breath? Still has to be Soul Mirror, right? Ugh, Militia is always a fear. But the thing is, if the Lapidary sticks, that is so much additional damage that Jarla is tanking.
So if you were to go Renew, you could, of course, find a strong clear, like Holy Spire, the Dream, to go with Breath of the Infinite, but I mean, it's pretty much exactly that, actually, that you're looking for to actually clear the board. And in the end, Jarla bites for it, bullet, places on the Soul Mirror, and that is big. That in this matchup is devastating. And as you so astutely pointed out, you have the Militia that at any point could just blow Jarla out of the game.
I think it's worth noting, though, that because it was such an early Soul Mirror, Jarla is saying it can't immediately be Militia to follow up on this turn, and maybe he's taking that one turn of breathing room to maybe put together an answer for a potential Militia in the future. Not that Glory particularly has any strong options at the moment. It could just be a turn where he goes Relentless Pursuit, Bladed Lady, clocks him in the face,
I
or
think
it
I like
could be some type of Aldraki play as well.
Yeah, I think I like the essence of that, but you just go Twin Slice Hero Power Bladed Lady, and then you get to end off with the Aldraki set up spell on the following turn. And
The issue with that is Murazond, because if you go Twin Slice and Eldraki on the same turn and give Jarla Bladed Lady, that might be a little bit too much on the other side.
do we think that's Carson getting a bit like he knows that there were reductions from the Nazmani, but it's still not super likely, right, that it comes down on the following turn.
True.
Wow.
Or you're seeing a decent upliftment of just Eldraki is still playing around Murazond and getting the spell online for the next turn. It is slow for the near future, but he is building up to maybe a big combo with the skull discount. I can respect it for sure.
I mean, it is an insane read to make there, to be able to not only think that they might have their mirrors on, but to factor in that it can be played before its mana cost should even indicate it can be played before is very, very impressive stuff. And just look, the reward is huge at this point to be able to play in this game.
Jarla is running one Kobold Sticky Finger in the list. He has not hit it thus far, but even if the Eldraki is removed, I think that's not too big of a deal for Glory. It's the Marrow Slicers really that are the heavy hitters in this matchup. Jarla has picked himself up an Apotheosis, but whether he can actually get healing off of it is another matter entirely.
Just taking the Warblade.
Yeah, this is looking like a play, more importantly, just to get the 8/8 on board. I think Jarla's head is at, I want an Apotheosis target for the next turn. Kind of 8/8. Praying there's no big stage. Got Militia off top. Ooh. I'm counting 3 fragments on the tracker in the deck. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if the tracker is messing with me. Maybe 1 fragment and then 3 have been drawn already.
But either way, it's not going to be game winning, I think, quite yet in this position. Glory can instead look at, if nothing else, just a relentless pursuit, attack into the Mirror's. I hate to say it, and then get down the Bladed Lady as well. If he doesn't think the Bladed Lady is going to stick, you could go for a charge. Sorry, a Shard Shatter Mystic, Relentless Pursuit, Bladed Lady, and then go face with the weapon and trade it with Bladed Lady. You just want to maximize that damage.
That was where my head was at. I like the idea of red here for Glory. As long as the board is here. Then again, Glory could be thinking Jarla does have that list, a bit less removal,
Right.
doesn't have the big heal.
That was a brutally tough choice. As you said, no Shadow or Deaths, but maybe Wave of Apathy plus Cabal Acolyte just steals it, and then he's staring down a massive board that he can't deal with immediately. A tough choice, but I think Glory, so far in the big decisions in this game, has shown excellent understanding of the way the matchup tends to be played.
It also works out to a slight benefit that if that was indeed the last fragment in the deck, then he can skull without any worries on the next turn. Still not getting to see Discovers, but I think Jarla is primarily looking for a good way to benefit off of the Sethek. Grave Runes is one way of doing so.
That's huge. Just with Circus Amalgam, like, there's no Silence in the deck because that's been used. There's no Kane in the deck. That is really tough to get through.
True. Glory is a single copy of one, which is short into magic. We're just going to put it on the Sethek because Jarla is more value here. He wants no ways to get healing.
Any day of the week. Like you said, trying to stick something for Apotheosis. We're happy about that. More healing, more cards to target minions to get that continual discovery of more and more spells.
So this is interesting for Glory. If he goes Skull and hits a single weapon buff, he can go Twin Slice and with this without the Skull reduction, so it's a little bit short of doing everything he wants to do. Oh. And a Chaos Strike would have been all the difference in the world here.
Yeah, take your card draw. Realize that there is nothing that can be done, at least for the moment, about this annoying Sethek Veilweaver. And then for the next turn, Jarla can start to pop off. If he gets raised dead, he's looking at a reasonable chance of reresurrecting Nazmani to get yet more reduction in all.
Wow.
There are multiple ways.
Sethek up? Did he? Wow. I thought he was here to Sethek 100% of the time here. That's shocking to me.
But it's Grave Runes, right? There's no way to.
Oh, right. Yeah. The second half, there's just. Oh man, if he had hit one more weapon buff, it could have been the full clear. That's okay. You're right. It is absolutely all about finding more ways to get value here. Pyro Apotheosis is gonna be a decent chunk of healing.
Is that really the way to go? I'm kind of looking at just starting with palm reading.
But that could be one more proc on the Apo for the Pyro.
I mean, I guess he might just be dead. Like you have to bear in mind that with Relentless Pursuits that could cost 0, even at 16, you're not feeling totally safe.
So if you go Pyro Apple palm reading, it's just 6 healing at the moment, and you're very likely to get another spell to be played after that, and at the very least you can go Wave of Apathy.
Whatever it is, sorry, it's time to get moving. Here for Jarla, there might be a lot more action yet to come on this turn, depending on whether the spells roll out. And he ends up with a respectable board at the end of it all here. A taunt that has to be chewed through, even if it is just with a Bladed Lady. And a situation that was looking great for Glory, where he prioritized that face damage, is all of a sudden now looking a lot weaker, where he's pretty much forced into attacking something into this Sethek Veilweaver to deal with the Apotheosis.
Yeah, both Blade Dances in the bottom 11 of his deck right now, which obviously that would have been the premium option. He could dig for it with an undiscounted skull effect, but that does not sound pretty. So where my head's at is Marrow Slicer, Twin Slice, Bladed Lady. Oh, but then the Shard Shatter also kills off the Bladed Lady in order to get rid of the second half of the Sethic. Maybe you just have to bite the bullet to get rid of the Sethic on both sides.
I think they take that. Like, 2 Sethics on board, they can start to just do illegal. Nothing is that little bit more likely to be able to play the control from the right-hand side. Rarely happens at this point in the game to be able to keep that card draw rolling.
So Idol of Yashraj is interesting. If he gets a 10-10 Nazmani, that's behold.
Well, he can start with the palm reading, see what he gets, and then follow up with the Idol, should that still be the best play presented.
Yep, I'm on board for that. The big upside of Idol is it's a huge minion that if you can stick Apotheosis, that's pretty much home free for Jarla.
Yeah.
I think he has a solid read on no Blade Dance at the moment.
The only thing to bear in mind here, I suppose, is he has Pyro Apotheosis in hand, but that's only half the combo. You also need spells to go with that. And as it currently stands, Breath the Infinite isn't great because it would damage his own Pyro in the meanwhile. Saving palm reading plus whatever it gives as well to go with Apotheosis and Pyro is definitely something to consider. So maybe we just get Idol plus Hero Power to heal up on this turn instead.
I like that, and I would even go so far as to say he's missing 2/3 of the combo, because from Pyro he needs spells and just minions on board, which there aren't very many. So the Pyro doesn't necessarily even heal him for that much.
And if you thought, Gia, that Cabal Acolyte as a 2/4, even a 2/6 in its pre-nerfed form was annoying, how about a 10/10 that you have to now try and munch through? What an absolute nightmare for Glory.
He has a big Militia push to get through, but Jarla did hold on to the Pyro combo. And I think you would just take a Pyro Apotheosis Breath of the Infinite.
Oh, yeah.
In the other order. Yeah.
During Spirit of Will knows again, the Storm Mirror has been used up here, but honestly, it's just not that difficult for Jarla to deal with anymore. It's kind of annoying for him that he has to use the Apotheosis combo when he's at a fairly high life total, on the Wild Pyromancer. But anything you can do to clear off the board here, because, I mean, honestly, he's getting to that threshold, I think, where Glory might just not have enough damage to close out the game. We've already seen Sociologist come down. It's really going to come down, I think, to Il'gynoth, and whether or not that can deal enough in combination with this remaining Aldraki to close out the game for Glory.
True, though, but the numbers are looking quite awkward here. If Jarla needs to pick up something significant from the palm reading to finish off the Militia, because even though Glory is running out of threats, I think Jarla's running into a similar problem where he doesn't have meat, but he discovered Draconic Studies, which is premium because it gives him a threat, activates the Cleric of Scales, makes the Breath of the Infinite not damage his own Pyro, and basically solves all of his problems.
Yeah,
that's insane.
Absolutely insane. You pick whatever dragon here, obviously he can't sadly think. Cleric Scales. Proto Drake is just about exactly what you would be looking for. That is insane.
That was the single greatest palm reading of all time. Just in terms of the ripple effect of how many other things it smoothed out for Jarla.
Like even the Breath of the Infinite that didn't damage his own board at the end. Like everything was perfect.
Yep. He now has a great threat to follow up as well, and Glory is, I was gonna say dodging fragments.
Poor Warlock.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, what this is coming down to very rapidly for Glory, in my opinion, is that he is, of course, trying to set up that Il'gynoth combo with Aldraki to try and get maybe a 15 damage burst, or like get, I don't know, up to 10 attacks you can do 20 damage all in one swing, or just stick a minion. Jarla is running out of cards. This Soul Shard Lapidary is next to 5, maybe 10 damage. That could be the difference in
It is true. If the Lapidary had gotten a discount instead of the Fragment, there was even a world where you just hold on to it for an even bigger
Yeah.
Il'gynoth combo. But I think its presence as a 5/5 here is much more significant.
I mean, we're looking for Shadow of Death, Apotheosis, even just a Wave of Apathy. There's a lot of good options here.
Honestly, I'd take a Plague of Death here if that were the best option and just rip it. Like,
I wonder.
yeah, you're probably right, actually. There's really not many threats left.
well, even if there isn't an immediate answer. Oh, he did! I'm a genius, Tarek. I can see what the Discover is not showing us. It's gotta be the play. I guess you're scared of just Il'gynoth coming down on its own for the next turn. But
then, you
if he
have
gets
Acolyte.
any cheap spell, Cabal Acolyte stealing that boy right back.
Yeah, looking down the list, looking down the next tracker, is there anything that can be used to put a big threat on board? And really, as you said, it is just Il'gynoth left, which means Glory has to find some kind of a big threat here. But just using that Chaos Strike is brutal, because that's potentially less damage than he's doing later on when he gets that big Il'gynoth swing turn. So is that one, unless he can find Il'gynoth right now to go with this Eldraki.
He is digging. Aside from Il'gynoth, there's Relentless Pursuit, Blade Dance. They were too late, and Wand Maker and Soul Fragment are the last card in his deck. It is so brutal how late these Blade Dances were. If that were in hand, the turn that Jarla had the Sethic with Grave Runes combo, we could have been looking at a completely different game. But I think it's all but locked out now. Glory does not have the damage to get there, even if he is able to somehow clear the Plague Proto-Drake. Cabal Acolyte plus Draconic Studies can steal Il'gynoth the moment it comes down.
Jarla was just so clean. I mean, honestly, the biggest thing that I've been afraid of from Jarla as philosophy, of course, comes in for Glory when it is completely useless.
The APAC curse! It's always happening.
I was afraid that Jarla would rope out, honestly, because that's what we've seen from him a few times over in Europe Grandmasters, and this deck requires a lot of actions. But even though he's come close to it, he's just got in everything he wants to be doing on all these turns, playing very strong plays, and just having such a good understanding of what you're actually afraid of in this deck. And as he starts to exhaust Glory of any and all capability to close out the game, I think he can hold his head high after a very strong first two games in his initial match in the World Championship.
If the next draw is Relentless Pursuit, he's guaranteed to get Il'gynoth at the end there, and then he can put together an impressive Blade Dance.
Bottom card? Il'gynoth, hello?
Yeah. But then the Il'gynoth immediately gets, I guess not sniped just by Evasive Worm, but Jarla just needs a spell to steal it back.
So in terms of the mana, he can go
Demons.
fitting in the Blade Dance. He can go like Hero Power, or maybe fit in a Twin Slice. Either way, like he can push quite a lot of damage to face, but it's not going to be enough to win the game on the spot.
Yeah.
I think we can clearly see.
Relentless Pursuit, Twin Slice, Eldraki, and Blade Dance with the Il'gynoth is his maximum damage output, which is only 16, I believe.
Just going for the double Blade Dance immediately. I mean, I can understand it. He's saving all the big weapon buffs for next turn, and this way he'll be able to push 22?
Yes, that's correct.
Which, I mean,
barring a ton.
as it currently stands, is looking pretty good. Obviously, Jarla will be able to creep up over that threshold. And honestly, aside from the mystery card that came off of the Wand Maker that could potentially be throwing him off guard here, he can figure out exactly the amount of damage.
House of Cards.
It was a valiant effort from Glory. Honestly, at the end game there, even managing to find a slim out was impressive, but Jarla had the mid game locked up so cleanly. The Grave Rune on the Sethic was, I think, the difference maker in this matchup. Him just slamming it immediately, taking one turn to maybe say, I could take some damage, but a small window to try and dodge Blade Dance was all it took for Jarla to swing the tempo back and drive him up to a 2-0 lead in the first series of the World Championship.
Just looking absolutely brutally strong. I mean, I think you and I were saying Glory was playing some very strong turns in the mid game. Actually, he knew exactly what you're looking to do to get that damage prioritized, stick those big bodies early on, which Jarla then struggles to deal with due to his lack of answers. In the end, wasn't quite enough just because of how low down in the deck Il'gynoth was. But it just goes to show, even against all that from Glory, Jarla's still playing very, very strong turns, game after game here, and even with a slightly weirder lineup compared to the rest of the field, still looking very, very strong. Only the OTK Demon Hunter left to be taken to win with, the only player to bring an OTK Demon Hunter to this weekend, sorry. And we're going to see if he can get it done in potentially the final game of the series when we come back from this very short break. Welcome back to the 2020 Hearthstone World Championships. You're just in time for the first match of the day. If you are joining us now, a full day of Hearthstone yet to come as we find out 2 of the 4 players who will be going through to the semi-finals tomorrow. And also, we will sadly be saying goodbye to a few from the World Championship. And in our first game of Glory versus Jarla, I think it's fair to say, Gia, that so far, despite Glory holding up a good fight, it's just been pretty dominant from Jarla thus far. And honestly, with this next match we have, I don't really see any signs of slowing down.
I do think that Jarla's lineup overall is slated to be quite favored against Glory, especially with the Elucia in his priest checking Glory's own OTK warrior. But maybe this Demon Hunter is the weak link. I'm hesitant to really say that after we've seen Jarla's quality of play on these slower decks. Personally, I have a really hard time making this deck work on ladder, but Glory does not have very many aggressive decks. There is the Soul DH to maybe worry about, but I'm also super worried about Glory's Control Warrior because it might not necessarily get the card draw. We thought really struggled to put together the pieces of the OTK, and it might not outpace a deck that has Skull of Gul'dan. We do see Glory, though, going for his Rogue first, which I know you were saying he's been playing a ton of on ladder.
Yeah, exactly. When Jarla was kind of trying to scout out his opponents and figure out what secret text they might have, he quickly realized that Glory has just been jamming an absolute ton of Rogue on ladder, which is not surprising. You know, we've seen him play the different iterations of Rogue throughout the expansions in Grandmasters quite a lot, and to great efficacy as well. He seems to be very proficient with this style of deck. I will say that for him bringing the Rogue, I think it's a bit of a hindrance in the way the metagame has shaken up, because he has got himself in a situation where there's a lot of aggro knocking about Rogue traditionally and continues to be fairly weak against aggro. But even having said that, with some of the new tools you're getting, like Foxy Fraud and Swindle, you're adding consistency to the deck with the tutoring of those important minions. And you're also adding bigger blowout potential with, as always, a big Edwin, a big questing that Demon Hunter might struggle to deal with.
Yep, those two cards are the kicker in this matchup that I think pushes Rogue into the favorite spot. Jarla is running that single consume magic, which he is keeping right off the bat because he knows that a single Edwin or questing early enough can completely pick apart his game plan. It's a bit tough for this OTK Demon Hunter to put together a Blade Dance, the size of which can actually deal with one of those minions. So Jarla is just cutting his losses and holding on to a consume magic straight off the top. Polkelt also kept to make sure that he gets Skull when it's in outcast position, which is pretty much the most important card in the deck.
And Polkelt really, for me, is the heart of this deck. Even though it's an OTK Demon Hunter, where we've all seen it at this point. You go for Il'gynoth that turns your lifesteal into damage for your opponent, and you play out either a Fellscream Blast or an I-Beam to deal huge amounts of damage with the Moarg, doubling all those damage effects. Very, very potent. But look, Polkelt is basically a single card that you play, and you're never going to run out of card draw for the rest of the game. So finding it in the starting hand for Jarla is so big.
It really is. And you can already see where Glory's head is at, just tempo Blackjack Stunner, because there's not very many minions that Glory wants to bounce back in Jarla's hand. By the time Jarla is playing his important minion, Glory's probably already dead. And the cool thing about this OTK Demon Hunter is that it has some redundancy with its combo pieces. You can definitely afford to throw out a Moarg before you have the OTK, especially since there's philosophy in the list to give yourself extra.
And for Jarla here, I am considering a few different plays here. I'm considering either of the two cards on the left and right in relation to I-Beam. I was kind of leaning towards I-Beam just while it's cheap, and that is not because I want to kill that especially, or you need to heal, obviously it's full health. It's just to delete a card from his hand. With Polkelt already there in play, or in his hand, sorry, Skull off the top into Skull off the top is just going to be way too many cards. So making sure that you're constantly pushing cards out of your hand, making that space is a critical part of this deck.
Absolutely. I think he needs to think many turns in advance, and using the I-Beam like that is very telling of how much experience Jarla has here. Spectral Sight off the top, while it's in outcast position, is pretty tempting, but Eldraki is the most efficient use of his mana and gets rid of the Foxy Fraud.
And I think this is actually very smart from Jarla. He honestly doesn't even have to attack here. He doesn't want to hold on to the Immolator. But the point is that after Polkelt is played, probably on turn 5 actually, to guarantee a Skull on the top, or maybe on turn 4 depending on what his draw is off the top, Spectral Sight will be able to go to the left-hand side, I think, fairly easily in the next few turns. So there's no real need to play it out now. And so he instead keeps that hand size low, spends his mana efficiently every turn, and it's still just looking very clean.
For Glory, though, I think this was a pretty tough turn. The hand is hold on to the coin, but you could just be saying you're very likely to have Immolation Aura by now, which deals with the majority of a Jandis board. So he wants to make sure that he has a threat this turn into maybe a questing turn on the follow-up. I could see this being an Immolation Aura turn, or even like Spectral Sight for one drop. As you mentioned, the skulls are going to come in soon, so you don't even necessarily need both of the draws.
Demons? Demons.
Very, very strange situation. I'm still just leaning towards, I think, Polkelt, because you're still guaranteed to be able to get that Skull on turn 6 in the next couple of turns. And it's a big body on board, which is kind of annoying, to be honest.
Just tough if one Skull gets stuck in the middle here, and I do think Jarla would want to get both of the spells active when the time comes.
If power is what you seek, knowledge is what I provide.
Right.
Give me a quest.
Oh, huge draw. Preparation allows him to go for a victory on the field with a lackey. And now Jarla can be very happy held onto Consume Magic. Well, not necessarily their simulation plus 0 power can deal with it.
Yeah, it's probably, I think, just going to be end up dealt with manually and save the silence. I mean, I guess you're not necessarily... Actually, you kind of don't want to draw a card here, do you? Because then you draw the spell. So doing it in the non-outcast position is pretty clever utilization there by Jarla, as he keeps cycling through all those cards in his deck.
Right. And he does just commit the Consume Magic to get the third tier here, because otherwise his variant would have been. But Glory, however, has the best possible follow-up into a Skullturn, which is just the biggest threat. The important thing to note with the OTK Demon Hunter is when you have to curate your deck order out, a lot of the removal options are a bit farther down in the deck. So Jarla's next cards are Thor of Rodan, Il'gynoth, and one of the many 3 drops.
And this is the really important thing, right, is that you kind of have to reduce one of the key combo pieces in your card to get up to the truly absurd amounts of damage. And because of the stacked ordering, Il'gynoth costing 1 just means you're so easily going to be getting that combo down when it comes to it. You just have to draw through to the low-cost cards in your deck. Titan, Eldstream Blast, Moag Enforcers as well, and Moag Artificers, sorry. And at that point, the Rogue is just done for. It has to be a more aggressive game plan than this from Glory if he's going to have any chance.
Yeah, well, the Rhino sticking around could be the difference maker. There's also, I think, still some room to maybe go for some Edwin shenanigans. I'm looking at this Foxy Fraud secret passage. Or you can just pray that he hits the Edwin off of a passage and try and win from that. He has seen the Consume Magic as well. Oh, it's gonna be Shadow Step. Oh man,
He
not
gets to draw a card off the beast, though. It's quite funny.
yeah.
I've never seen that interaction before. It is actually pretty good in this instance. Conjurer's Calling could be very potent as well, actually, with these 5 drops in order to get yet more threats on the board, which is exactly what he needs to be doing. These couple of turns are the one window of weakness for Jarla. He's drawing the expensive cards, the 3-cost cards from his deck, which is not the removal for the most part. So now Glory needs to go maximum tempo, maximum development, and he gets Arcane Missiles for yet more damage. He is going as all in as he can to try and get the win right now, and that is his win.
Missiles is a great use of them. I was tunneling on the invocation for that turn, but he didn't have that much chance space to actually use with it for the next turn. So I think it's very good Glory there. I'm just very amused that Starving Buzzard is making an appearance in a World Championship in 2020.
Who'd have thought? It's been a while, old friend.
This is gonna pick up one of the many 2 drops. There's a Zephyrus in Jarla's list as well, but it's a long way off from being active.
Man, it really is just...
huge.
It's so quick that you cycle through this deck. I was saying there's a couple of turns before Jarla finds his removal. He's already got it again now. Like, these Blade Dances are just so easily going to be able to clear off anything that Glory does in the next few turns. And the card draw just doesn't stop anytime soon either.
Glory is also just not running Plagiarize, so Jarla has full info that the secret
Mm-hmm.
with Edwin Master Glory, but is there anything off of Conj that can make some miracles happen?
I mean, I think I'm not looking at Conjurer's Calling. I'm looking at that second secret passage. I'm saying it needs to be Edwin right now. You can start with the Swindle, I suppose, to try and rip it out of your deck the old-fashioned way. That doesn't happen. And I'm just not seeing these cards in hand being aggressive enough right now.
Yeah.
I think it has to be Edwin. This Hanar is good, but it's just too slow. You want to save that for the final turns to maybe try and trip Jarla up.
Just under 50% to rip the Edwin right now. Glory only has 9 cards in his deck at the moment. I am on board looking for the Edwin. It won every single World Championship except last year. Oh, one more chance. It's
Oh,
still not there. No.
brutal. Absolutely brutal. He knew his game plan. He was going after it very, very well, but it was not enough in the end. Evil Miscreant is going to have to do for the moment, and as soon as Jarla sees this, he is going to be over the moon. This isn't even scary at all. This gets wiped up so easily.
Extremely easily. And now he's in the territory where the Moargs are very close to Tron. The Hellscream Blast is what's really going to give him the most damage for the OTK at some point later on. Honestly, he
more
doesn't
card
even need
draw.
to care about the damage as it stands right now. It could be a full card draw turn.
5 cards he's drawing here. The next 3 are all going to cost 0 mana as well. Like, it's very, very possible that he's just going to have the lethal on the next turn, the way this is currently shaking out.
So, as for the remaining 2 drops, oh man, the deck tracker reset, but there's 2 Moargs in there, and the Hellscream Blast is still not guaranteed to be at the very next turn draw. So it's actually not that simple to navigate for Jarla. I think he is very close to activating Zephyr, so that could be one.
Is he gearing up for a board clear turn instead with the Blade Dance? I can respect the idea that you're facing down too much pressure here, but I think in reality he knows that this is just not that scary at all, to be perfectly honest. He can just keep on chilling for the moment, tank the damage, clear up in one big swing turn for if the Edwin or questing comes down in the next couple of turns, and just be quite happy about it.
Indeed. It's slightly unfortunate for Jarla that he missed the discounts. The only 2 drops remaining in his deck are the Moargs, so Ooze is very irrelevant at how scary I think is the for some type of cheese plate to mess with Jarla. Oh my Yogg could be a difference maker here.
Okay.
But Jarla will be able to, I think, test for this pretty carefully.
And I think that's part of the thinking, to be fair, for Jarla holding on to these spells. Like, the Immolation Aura was fairly nice there, but he's saving an activator for Oh My Yogg, obviously for Counterspell more traditionally as the secret or spell interruption that you can go for off Hanar.
Thinking just Noble Sack is the cheapest reroll disruption at this point. Glory has given up on trying to face Jarla, instead just trying to make Jarla mess up.
It's not likely to happen. I will say Jarla is not one of those players who is likely to mess up at all. But it's something you try and play for at least.
So without Fellscream Blast, I'm still not seeing a lethal. There are the next draw. But he could just take this turn as a board clear. He is somewhat scared of Omayog, so testing with Chaos Strike first and then going for Immolation Aura.
Nicely done. Soul of the Murloc. Okay.
Very cute, but it is just gonna get cleared up by the Immolation Aura.
Oh yeah, true. Born to die. Unlucky Murloc.
Okay, pressure plate here now.
Yeah, you'd obviously have to start off with Moarg and then go for the Immolation Aura, which is fine if you did want to go for it that way. That would still end up being a full combo that is available in the next few turns, but it might slow things down a little bit. So I think for Jarla here, because his next draw off the top could just be Fellscream Blast, which I think just ends the game pretty much on the spot, he will try and hold on to the Moarg if possible.
Or Ethereal Augmentation, Velocity, and Slice, and the 2 Fellscream Blast. It has, at minimum, 2 draws per turn, Chaos Strike, and if you get one of the Fellscream Blast, you have to Velocity, but you can copy his Moarg anyway. So I think, in the grand scheme of things, he's fine to give up 1 Moarg, but there could be some disastrous draws here if it's Twin Slice and Ethereal off the top with both of the Fellscream at the bottom.
It's okay here as well for Glory, but it's honestly not amazing. Like, the Shadow Step can't be used on anything unless he goes Witchy Lackey first and then questing. You obviously don't want to go Conjurer's Calling on your questing very much at all. You could go, like, get the Kartut down and then go prep Conjurers on it to get 2 6 drops.
That's where my head's at.
Boy. That doesn't feel great.
It gets a bit of healing as well. I don't know.
Or you could then end actually by going Witchy Lackey on the 3-1 that would be left over, right? So you get,
Give me a quest.
to be fair, 2 6-drops and a 7-drop.
Choose soon.
Very real thing. Ori at this point will be worried about. So I feel like Justice would have marginally harder time.
Right.
With 7 drops compared to a single large thing. Kind of allows Ori to send his man off. Also, let's say the secret Jarla last prioritize board here to make sure that Hanar would not disrupt the combo
Yeah.
for those pieces.
Okay, I'm on board with this line from Glory. It still allows him to go for the play I was looking at next turn with just Katu conjuring 0 mana Witchy Lackey, and he gets the immediate effect of Questing Adventurer.
No! The Falcons are at the bottom alongside Ethereal Merchant, so Zephyrus is still not active.
Mm-hmm.
So he has to Blade Dance away the questing with the Twin Slices. I guess that's not too disastrous. He doesn't have to give up any combo pieces.
How would he do that? Oh, he's
With
played the
Hero
Chaos
Power?
Strike. Okay, yeah, no, that's fine, that's fine. Doesn't have to play the Moog. All good then.
But he still has. He gets the 1 in 3 worst outcome of Ethereal Og Merchant next turn. He's still one more turn later.
Right.
Double Fellscream Blast are at the very bottom. Glory has one more push onto the board with 30 centers and the 3-1 turning into a 7-drop.
4-12. I mean, even if it is the Fellscream Blast, it's not actually lethal quite yet, though, is it?
With Zephyrus active, I think it would be. I don't know if Zephyrus reads Il'gynoth, but
Oh, Zephyrus active now as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Just because you have the mana spare, so I think that will just be enough to close out the game. He can deal 12 damage to the opposing minions. He will then have...
Zephyrus Fireball is too expensive
too much mana.
at that point.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's not lethal, right? So
Okay.
it's Zephyrus Nether this turn, I suppose.
Zephyrus Nether. That's fine. And then if you get the Ethereal Orc Merchant, you can just do the combo on your own minions, whether or not
Correct.
Glory tempos out his own board on the following turn, so that would be fine.
You know, if you could tell Zephyrus to give you freeze instead of Nether here, that is the better option because you could maintain their minions as a
True.
target for Fellscream Blast plus your own board.
I mean, if I
But-
could talk to Zeph, I'd have some other choice words for him rather than that, but okay, stall out for another turn. This is still fine.
Jarla, I think you would have the combo even if Glory plays nothing next turn.
Yeah.
Don't let the door hit you.
It's 20 damage as I counted, which actually with the hero power would be exact lethal, I believe. Either way.
Bender? Does that do anything? I don't know. If you Bender and backstab your own minion, does that mess with their Fellscream Blast enough?
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be on the outside, right? So it would only ever target 2 minions.
Yeah.
It was something to
Instead of
consider.
3. I don't know.
Mm.
It's very difficult to consider. I never would choose Glory though for just taking Pyroblast. I'll mess up here. Okay,
Fellscream Blast. This is lethal now, right? Because you play all your minions, and you have Il'gynoth and Ooze next to each other. You shoot them first, that's 8 damage. Then you shoot the Moog in the middle, which is 12 damage, and then you hero
then you
power
hero
to finish off.
Great spot.
I'm pretty sure that this is just lethal now. I mean, well, the Moags actually have 5 health anyway, so they just survive.
yeah,
so I
yeah,
think
yeah.
you can just blast everything twice, actually. It's even simpler than I originally thought. Just double check in, triple check in. This is the World Championship stage, and he will be going through to the winner's bracket match if he does take the win here.
He absolutely will. It was approach better. Jarla had the double Fellscream Blast very clear the bottom of the deck, but at the very last moment, locked up the win there with a 3-0 sweep over Glory. It's Jarla was very impressive going overall.
Yeah, I think just very, very strong play. He clearly knows the deck inside and out. He was keeping exactly the number of combo pieces that he needed to deal that necessary damage to get over the finish line. We can argue from Glory there at the end if there were any other ways he could have approached it, like going for a different ordering with the questing at the end, but I think to be perfectly honest, he knew very well that you're going for Edwin as aggressively as possible in that matchup. Just try and stick it to the point where he was even foregoing big Hanar turns, anything else that could have been developed. He wasn't rewarded for it in the end, as it was another pretty unlucky game for Glory. It means he's going down 0-3 to the losers bracket match, the elimination match to be played out against, I believe, either Bloodyface or Shao T as the other two representatives in our group here. But I mean, we were expecting a lot of aggro over the weekend with Evolve Shaman, Highlander Hunter to start things off. And I think that was a nice way to start things out in maybe a slightly different tone there, with Jarla showing some very, very clean